Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into some really heavy reports about China's organ transplant system. We're going to look at these claims that connect state-run healthcare with, believe it or not, international diplomacy and some really tough ethical questions.
So let's just start with this quote because it's pretty wild. It is predicted that people will have the opportunity to live to 150 in the next century. Now, according to the sources we're looking at, that's attributed directly to China's leader, Xi Jinping. I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, right? But this one statement really kicks off a much deeper dive into the kind of systems that would have to exist to even dream of something like that.
Okay, so how on earth do you connect the dots between this wild prediction about living to 150 and a state-run organ transplant system? Well, the reports we're breaking down today, they lay out a really complex story. They claim this ambition is tied into high-level diplomacy, secret health projects, and, yeah, some incredibly serious ethical questions. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the conversation that started it all. Then, we'll dig into this idea of organ diplomacy. After that, a supposed secret project for longevity. Then, the really tough part, where the organs allegedly come from. And finally, how the world is reacting to all of this.
All right, let's jump into our first section. It all starts with a conversation that, on the surface, might have seemed casual, but it ended up putting this whole issue on the world stage.
So here's the thing about this remark to Vladimir Putin. According to the sources, this wasn't some off-the-record whisper. It was actually broadcast and then, reportedly, scrubbed from some official Chinese media outlets. The claim being made was just incredible. That with organ transplants, 70-year-olds are basically children, and people could get younger and younger. It's presenting this idea of radical life extension not as a future dream, but as something happening right now.
Okay, if you have this amazing ability to get organs so easily, what do you do with it? Well, that leads us right into our next topic. The reports we're looking at call it organ diplomacy, and they argue this medical power is being used as a pretty unique tool of foreign policy.
And let's be really clear about what the source material is claiming here. They're saying this is not just rich people flying in for a procedure. No, they describe it as a strategic, state-run program where access to life-saving organs is offered to important people from other countries. The goal? To build relationships and, well, political influence. And here we have a prime example, according to the sources. This is Malaysia's head of state, Sultan Ibrahim, meeting with Xi Jinping. The Sultan himself publicly talked about a special arrangement with China that allowed him to get a successful liver transplant. This is exactly what the reports point to as organ diplomacy in action.
And the articles claim he's not the only one. They point to what they say is a pattern. You've got the Sultan's son, also getting a liver transplant back in 2014, another Malaysian MP, even a senior official from Qatar, all of them allegedly beneficiaries of these super-fast organ transplants in China.
So this all begs a huge question, right? What kind of system do you need to have in place to not only do this for foreign leaders, but also to fuel that ambition of living to 150? Well, the sources claim it all ties back to a very secretive state-run project.
They call it the 981 Health Engineering Project. Now, according to a WeChat post from 2019 that's cited in these reports, this wasn't for just anyone. It was a program specifically created to give the absolute top leadership of the Communist Party the best medical care on the planet, with the stated goal of getting them to live to be 150.
And this project supposedly has 3 stages. You start with basic stuff, health preservation, then it gets more advanced, youth rejuvenation, talking about things like stem cells and gene therapy, and then you have the final phase, 150-year longevity engineering. And guess what's at the heart of that phase? Organ replacement.
And this is where the story takes a very dark turn. Because think about it, a system that can provide organs on demand, not just for its own leaders, but for foreign VIPs too, well, that requires a massive, constantly available supply of organs. Which leads to the unavoidable central question of this whole thing. Where are all these organs coming from?
The reports we looked at point to a pretty staggering statistic. They say that right around the year 2000, which, not coincidentally, is just after the state began its persecution of the Falun Gong spiritual group, the number of organ transplant surgeries in China just exploded. We're talking an average jump of 180% year after year.
And to really get why this is so alarming, you have to look at wait times.
I mean, you probably know that in places like the US or the UK, waiting for a compatible organ can take years. It's a long, agonizing process. But the articles report that in China, patients were finding matching organs in weeks, sometimes even days. And medical experts quoted in these reports say that speed is, well, it's basically impossible without something else going on.
So how do these reports explain that impossible speed? They point to an incredibly disturbing conclusion, one that's been reached by international groups like the Independent China Tribunal. And that conclusion is that this massive organ supply comes from prisoners of conscience, who are not consenting.
And this is the key point in the allegations. The claim is that this isn't some rogue black market operation. The sources describe it as a state-sanctioned, systematic process. And they name the alleged primary sources of these organs: Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, Christians, and other political prisoners. So with allegations this serious, how has the rest of the world responded? As you can imagine, this has definitely not gone unnoticed. Let's get into our final section on the international reaction.
The response from the global community, based on the reports, is kind of a two-pronged attack. On one side, you have widespread condemnation from governments and human rights groups, the US State Department, the European Parliament. But on the other side, words are turning into action. We're now seeing actual laws being passed, like in the US, designed to sanction anyone involved in this practice.
And the language being used here it's not subtle. I mean, take this quote from U.S. Representative Chris Smith. He alleges that from Xi Jinping down, they've used murder to take the internal organs of people to prolong their own lives. It really shows you just how severe these accusations are. And all of this, everything these reports lay out, it leaves us with a really heavy final thought. We have this incredible quest for longer life, pushing the absolute limits of medical science. But at the same time, we have these horrifying allegations about how that might be achieved. It really forces us to ask a tough question. As we get better and better at prolonging life, where do we draw the line to protect basic human rights?